President Trump is looking abroad for help securing safe passage for oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz.
Really, I'm demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory because it is their territory. It's the place from which they get their energy, and they should come and they should help us protect it.
While Trump has told Americans to expect a short-term spike in gas prices, the rising cost of energy continues to be a major concern for the Trump administration. We are joined by The Hill's Deputy Managing Editor, Sarakshi Rai, for more on what we know about Trump's international quest for help. Hey, Sarakshi, so which countries has the president reached out to, and so far, how are they responding?
That's right. So we know Trump has reached out to 7 countries so far. Now, he's not publicly disclosed who those countries are, but we do know that American allies have kind of responded quite coolly to his request to help monitor and get ships through the Strait of Hormuz. We do know that the sharpest refusal really came from Germany earlier today, whose defense minister said that this is not our war, we didn't start it. We know that, France as well as the UK have been a bit hesitant to join. They've been a bit non-committal, but they haven't outrightly said no just yet. We do know British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also said that, the UK will not be drawn into a wider war. But we do know so far that Australia has outright refused to join. Italy has refused to join, as has Norway. So far, this coalition that the president is hoping to find to help him with the Strait of Hormuz and getting these oil tankers out hasn't really been very receptive in terms of European countries and how they've seen this request through.
Most of the oil resources out of the Persian Gulf actually head to Asia, which makes you wonder, how does China feel about all this? They get 40% of their oil resources through the strait. I guess the question is this closure damaging the Chinese economy? And what is the Trump administration saying to China?
So we know that, the Trump administration did mention China in terms of its request to kind of get these oil tankers out of the Strait of Hormuz that is currently being blockaded by the Iranians. But, for all intents and purposes, at least according to the reports that we've seen, Chinese ships and vessels are already getting through the Strait of Hormuz. We know that, Chinese oil tankers haven't really been impacted by the blockade. And so far, a few other countries, reports suggest, like India, have also seen their tankers safely past the Strait of Hormuz. So essentially, for the Chinese, in terms of their calculation and getting involved in this coalition to police the Strait of Hormuz to make sure that these oil tankers can get through this Iranian blockade, they already have their ships going through. So for them, it's an interesting conundrum in the sense of, why would they get involved in this policing effort when they're really not being impacted by it at all, Drew? And we know Iran sells primarily most of its oil to China as well.
Yeah. Has Iran responded to the U.S. request for help in securing the strait? I mean, as you said, Iran says some ships are passing through. What are they saying about this U.S. effort to kind of build a coalition of countries willing to work on security there?
Right now, we're not hearing much, but we do know one of the major concerns from European countries in terms of agreeing to this coalition is, let's not forget that the Strait of Hormuz is extremely narrow. Now, not only is the threat to these oil tankers and any possible military escort through the strait, subject to Iranian missiles, but we also know that Iran does employ gunboat, strategy in terms of with missiles on it that they can use to attack the strait. It's very narrow. It's it's very easy to get across in one of those Iranian gunboats and be a threat to those naval vessels and any oil tankers passing through, Drew. So that is kind of playing into the calculation as well. But Iran, for its part, hasn't really said anything in terms of oil or this coalition from the Europeans. What we do know is that, they've been bullish. They've said that this is not a war that Iran started. They said it was illegal on behalf of the United States to start this war. But really, for all intents and purposes right now, Iran is very focused on the fact that, pushing this messaging out that the Iranian regime has not been defeated despite, what we know is the decimation of their military and naval facilities, Drew.
And what do we know about the U.S. decision to strike Iran's critical oil hub at Karg Island? How does that factor into the security situation in the strait?
Karg Island is very strategic for Iran. It's long been kind of hinted at that President Trump would strike this island. We do know in a Truth Social post that he put out that he said that, he had left any oil and electrical targets on Karg Island, 100 meters distance, and he struck down most of their military sites on Karg Island. And he's saying that's because he doesn't want to see, any impact to Iranian oil production. But he did say that he could potentially strike Karg Island again, Drew. This is really an interesting development that came early over the weekend, and we know the president has been asked about it multiple times on Air Force One, and he's kind of said that he is willing to go in and strike it again if Iran doesn't capitulate and agree to end this fighting, Drew.
President Trump says that NATO countries should come help the U.S. secure the strait and that it could be bad for the future of NATO if they refuse. What can the president do to pressure NATO to support his aims of getting the strait open?
That's right. So President Trump made this very vague comment on Air Force One last night where he said, it could be very bad for NATO if they don't agree to help him in terms of policing the Strait of Hormuz and getting that coalition going to get those oil tankers through. But what he means by it and what his comments are hinting at is unclear. We do know that, the NATO countries have been reluctant to enter into any sort of coalition. We know that so far, Italy has said they wouldn't be joining. Germany has said they wouldn't be joining. France and the UK have been non-committal so far. Norway has said they won't be joining, and so for all intents and purposes, it's not clear what exactly the president was hinting at when he said that it would be very bad for NATO, but he has, on occasion taken to threatening NATO, even when it came to the issue of Greenland. And, we've seen previously in terms of any Ukraine funding as well. So this has been sort of a pattern that has been repeated by the president, but whether, the NATO allies see this as a serious threat to their coalition, or whether they are just going to call out President Trump on his bluff is unclear. But for now, they're taking his comments slightly seriously, but because there's no real intent or there's no explanation for what he does mean, they're not really responding to that just yet, Drew.
And could be a tricky political situation for those NATO countries internally if they do, or if they are seen as supporting this U.S. Israeli military action in Iran. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, that's right, Drew. That's right. Because, let's not forget that within these European countries and some of these NATO allies, support for this war in Iran is very low. They truly, most of the public in the UK or France or Germany do believe that their country shouldn't get involved in a war that was started by the United States and Israel. So you're absolutely correct in terms of where the public standing is in some of these countries. There is very little support for this war.
Yeah. All right. Surakshi Rai, thanks so much for your insight. Appreciate it.